Hello, my name is Adam Wampler, and this is my sketchbook. Here I jot down and investigate the many mysteries and questions I have in my day-to-day life. Today we are going to be looking at Wormian bones, a very interesting phenomenon that traces its roots back to pre-hominid ancestors and has caused a lot of controversy even today. This all started in physical anthropology class when we were looking at skulls. Learning the various bones and reasons for creation and how they were formed throughout the lifetime of a human, a few questions popped in my head, specifically some observations. For you see, on the backside of a bone specifically, normally you have your occipital bone at the very base, right beneath the jaw. You have your parietals on the outside. The best way to think of parietals is when you grab the back of your head, it's the places where your hands go. They're all formed and joined by the sutures into one specific area called the lambdal suture. However, not every skull we noticed looked like this. Some skulls had an extra bone right at the lambdal suture. This is called a Wormian ossicle. Now, Wormian ossicles were named after the Dutch anatomist Olaus Ol Worm. He lived from 1588 to 1654 and described this particular phenomenon in a 1643 letter to a friend. Now, it's not the first mention of these bones either. Paracelsus, the infamous scientist of the 1400s, also described these bones within his own research. And even earlier than that, Greek medicine was describing these bones in their use in medicine back in antiquity. But the bones themselves are ancient structures. They have been found in Homo erectus and Australopithecus. A specific Australopithecus prometheus specimen excavated in 1948 by Dart uncovered 2 Wormian bones right at the lambdal suture. Now, how do these form? They seem to be out there and they've been going on for quite a while. Well, the commonly accepted theory has to do with the development of the bones in the skull itself. For the specific bottom bone, the occipital bone, it forms in a unique way. The bottom half of the bone is formed from cartilage. It is a cartilaginous formation where the cartilage slowly ossifies over the development of the skull. The upper part is a membrane. This membrane is made up of several nuclei. These cells that, as they slowly grow and ossify, join together to form one complete bone, normally. Sometimes, however, these nuclei and their various individual cells are unable to join together. This is one potential explanation for Wormian bones. With that, they're surprisingly common. From just looking at it, you might think that you would never know where you might find them. However, it's estimated in some states that as much as 50% of the population has them, to as little as 1% of the population. Males have been noticed to have a much higher occurrence of Wormian bones than females. And there are some questions about geographical relation to the way these form. Some studies have placed bones excavated in China as having rates as high as 80% of the population, while bones from Europe having as low as 10%. It's all a very various field. But the question still remains, how did they form? While the nucleus theory is one common option, alternatives have been proposed. Specifically, head binding was one of them. People have proposed that head binding or intentional deformations of the skull for religious or cultural practices can cause Wormian bones to form as the skull itself stretches. Dural stress has also been named as a cause. The simple muscular stress of holding your head upright, of the various stresses that can come across a skull in your everyday day-to-day lives, has the potential to form a Wormian bone, or at least that's what some propose. Of course, genetics plays some role in it, though its exact role is not fully known. Some genetic diseases, such as Down syndrome, rickets, or Menkes have been, or such as Down syndrome Merkitz Menkes, have been known to at least have Wormian bones as a potential cause. But one of the most interesting factors about Wormian bones is the most common location. For you see, the majority of Wormian bones form in the lambdal region, this small little triangle between the occipital and parietal bones, the place where I first saw my Wormian bones. This bone is specifically called the interparietal bone. However, it's known by another, more controversial name. The Inca bone itself has racist roots to its naming patterns and conventions, potentially. There are 3 proposed hypotheses for how this bone got its name. The first is it was named after Incan architecture and jewelry, coming from people observing that indigenous cultures of South America, specifically of the Incan Empire, wore more triangular shapes within their clothing. The second is that Incan skulls themselves had a greater preponderance of these Wormian bones, specifically the lambdal and the parietal bone. This is from Incan mummies, and there is some evidence to there being many Wormian bones within these mummies themselves. However, the occurrence rates are not significantly higher than anywhere else, though there was a study conducted in Chile of pre-contact Chilean bones that found a greater percent of Wormian bones than would be found in most European sets of skeletons. There is a third hypothesis, which is that in an encyclopedia known as the Book of Knowledge from the 1960s, simply called it Inca bones, likely pulling on the work of a German scientist from 1844, who, in attempting to categorize the race of people within the Americas, pulled on Wormian bones as an indicator of Incan heritage. This racist notion has been long since disproven, but the name still sticks for some. Now, this has led to a further problem within the literature. As I said, there's a racist connotation to many of the Inca bones specifically. The interparietal bone there, with the alternate name, has that racist connotation from when people were first discovering it and trying to use it as a sign to prove racial barriers between humans. Of course, this is a very flawed argument to make. However, in the media search, it's led to a lot of confusion between India, as in the place where they're looking at Indian bones from India, or Indian, as in the outdated terminology for Native Americans. Overall, this research has led me on a large journey. From papers published as early as 1643 to research as new as 2022, over 35 different sources across 4 languages: English, Spanish, German, and Latin. And of course, I've come to 3 main conclusions. First, Wormian bones are well documented. This mystery that I encountered in physical anthropology is not so much a mystery to medical community. There is much research into why they exist, where they exist, and how they came to be. However, there are so many questions to be asked. This brings us to the second. There is no consensus for why they're there. There are many probable causes, many likely scenarios for why they exist. However, there is no single accepted theory for why. Everyone will propose different reasons for how they came about and what their importance is. And finally, scientific racism is still prevalent in papers today. While a lot of the papers that I encountered that were engaged in the specific attempts to specify by species were from the 1800s and 1900s, when sadly you would expect to see that kind of thought. Some papers even today had notes of scientific racism, pulling on those theories without thinking about or critically analyzing where they may have come from or how they might have gotten started. The Wormian bone, specifically the interparietal bone that I saw, and that they sparked a curiosity in skulls that I still don't feel satisfied with. The research process was an interesting look into how the medical field can take a rather common phenomenon, such as the Wormian bones, and look deep into its origins, how it forms, what is it doing today, and where might it go in the future. That concludes today's episode of the Sketchbook. I hope you enjoyed this look into my mind, and I'll see you all next time.